emissions restrictions for mercury and other toxins issued by the EPA last December. A procedural vote on that bill is set for 11:30 this morning. Senators will then continue with debate and votes on amendments to the Farm Bill. 43 amendments left to be debated and voted on. A final passage vote could happen today. And now to live coverage of the U.S. Senate here on C-SPAN 2.
Senate will come to order. The chaplain, Dr. Barry Black, will lead the Senate in prayer.
Let us pray. Eternal God, our sustainer, it is time to pray. And in the silence of this moment, examine our hearts. Lord, you know our thoughts and see where we fall short of your glory. Restore us to your purposes as you lead us in the path everlasting. Search the hearts of our senators. You know the struggles that confront them, the things they wrestle with, the things that irritate and gnaw at them and cause them to abandon trust in you. O God, you know us better than we know ourselves. Search our hearts and give us your peace. We pray in your loving name. Amen.
Please join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Clerk will read a communication to the Senate.
Washington, D.C., June 20th, 2012. To the Senate, under the provisions of Rule 1, Paragraph 3 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, I hereby appoint the Honorable Kirsten E. Gillibrand, a Senator from the State of New York, to perform the duties of the Chair. Signed, Daniel K. Inhofe, President pro tempore.
Madam President.
The Majority Leader.
I move to proceed to calendar number 250, S-1940.
Clerk will report.
Motion to proceed to calendar number 250, S-1940, a bill to amend the National Flood Insurance Act of 1968 and so forth, and for other purposes.
Madam President, I have a cloture motion on the desk I wish to be reported.
The clerk will report the motion.
Cloture motion. We, the undersigned senators, in accordance with the provisions of Rule 22 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, hereby move to bring to a close the debate on the motion to proceed to calendar number 250, S-1940, a bill to amend the National Flood Insurance Act of 1968 to restore the financial solvency of the Flood Insurance Fund and for other purposes, signed by 17 senators as follows.
Madam President, I would ask the consent of the Chair that the names not be read.
Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent that the mandatory quorum required under Rule 22 be waived.
Without objection.
Madam President, following leader remarks today, the Republican leader will move to proceed to SJRES 37. Following that motion, the time until 11:30 will be divided between the two leaders or the designees, with Republicans controlling the first 30 minutes and majority controlling the next 15 minutes. Make sure that's right. Following that motion, that is the one that Senator McConnell will make, the time until 11:30 will be equally divided between the two leaders or the designees, with the Republicans controlling the first 15 minutes and the majority controlling the next 15 minutes. And I have designated that Senator Rockefeller will take that 15 minutes. At 11:30, the Senate will proceed to vote on motion to proceed to S.J. Res. 37. If the motion to proceed is not agreed to, the Senate will then resume S. 3240, which is the Farm Bill, and the votes in relation to the amendments that remain in order to the bill. So senators should expect a long day of voting starting at 11:30. Madam President, we did extremely well yesterday. We were able, as I indicated last night, to even turn in the votes earlier because everyone was here. There are a lot of things going on in Capitol today, but we're going to have to stick to our business at hand and make sure that we get through this long list of amendments, because we're going to have to finish this and the flood control before flood insurance legislation, before we leave her this week. That's a large assignment, but we have to do that. I ask consent that with respect to any amendments voted on during Tuesday's session where motion to reconsider were not made, that the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Without objection. The leadership time is reserved.
Madam President.
The Republican leader.
Are we in a quorum call?
No.
Madam President, I now move to proceed to S.J. Res. 37.
Clerk will report.
Motion to proceed to calendar number 430, S.J. Res. 37, joint resolution to disapprove a rule promulgated by the Administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency relating to emission standards for certain steam-generating units.
Madam President.
Republican leader.
It's become pretty clear over the past few months that President Obama now views his job as the deflector in chief. No longer content to lay all the nation's problems at the feet of his predecessor, he's taken to creating controversies out of whole cloth. And whether it's a manufactured fight over student loan rates or the so-called war on women, the goal is as clear as you can imagine. Get reporters to focus on these things, and maybe the rest of the country will as well. Get them to focus on anything other than the president's own failure to turn the economy around. And maybe he can squeak by without folks noticing it. That's the plan, at least, and frankly, it couldn't reflect a more misguided view of the American people. Now, they know who's been in charge the past 3.5 years. And the fact that the president had a tough job to do doesn't mean he gets a pass on how he's handled it or on the solutions he has proposed. Most Americans don't like either one of the president's two signature pieces of legislation, Obamacare or the stimulus. They're not particularly thrilled about seeing America's credit rating downgraded for the first time ever. They're scared to death about its $16 trillion debt, trillion-dollar deficits, and chronic joblessness. And many, including myself, are deeply concerned about this administration's thuggish attempts to shut its critics right out of the political process. These are the kinds of things Americans have been telling us for 3 years they're worried about. And we're not about to be drawn into some rabbit hole so the president doesn't have to talk about them. We're going to stay focused on all of these things, not because of some political advantage, but because the American people demand it. So the president can come up with the excuse du jour, but we're going to talk about jobs. We're going to talk about the deficits and debt. We'll talk about the Constitution. And when it comes to jobs, let's be clear. This administration has been engaged in a war on the private sector. And in many cases, it used federal agencies and a heavy-handed regulatory process to wage it largely out of view. We got a vivid confirmation of this when an EPA official was caught comparing the EPA's enforcement approach to the Roman use of crucifixion. Brutalize a few offenders, he said, and the rest will be scared into submission.
Call me naive, but I think most Americans think the government should be working for them, not against them. I think most Americans think the federal government should be working to create the conditions for Americans to prosper, not looking for any opportunities to undercut free enterprise. Yet that's what we see, an administration that always seems to assume the worst of the private sector and whose policies are aimed at undermining it. And nowhere is it more clear than at EPA. That's why I support Senator Inhofe's ongoing efforts, including a vote today to push back on the EPA, which has become one of the lead culprits in this administration's war on American jobs. Senator Inhofe is focusing on just one regulation out of the many that are crushing businesses across the country. The so-called utility MAC, which would cost American companies billions in upgrades, but their competitors overseas, of course, would cost them nothing. This regulation would expand the already massive powers given to EPA by increasing red tape and costing the taxpayer over $10 billion each year. In my state, Kentucky alone, it threatens the jobs of over 1,400 people working in aluminum smelter plants, as well as approximately 18,000 coal miners, not to mention those engaged in industries that support these jobs. Kentucky Power, operator of the only coal-burning power plant in my state, recently conceded defeat in this fight. After the EPA demanded upgrades to its plant at a cost of nearly $1 billion, raising the typical residential customer's monthly electric bill by a whopping 30%. At that price, it's no wonder the plant found the new regulations completely unworkable. The EPA may have won this battle, but the real losers are more than 170,000 homes and businesses spread out among 20 eastern Kentucky counties that depend on the Kentucky Power Plant for their energy. The proponents of the utility MAC say it's needed to improve air quality. What they can't tell you is what these benefits would be, or the effect of leaving the plants in their current condition. Look, we all support clean air, but if we waved through every regulation that promised to improve air quality without regard to its actual impact, we wouldn't be able to produce anything in the country. What we do know is a substantial amount of the electricity we produce in this country comes from coal. And this new regulation would devastate the jobs that depend on this cheap, abundant resource. This is just one battle in the administration's war on jobs, but it has a devastating consequence for real people and real families in my state and in many others. The administration's nonchalant attitude about these people is appalling, but this is precisely the danger of having unelected bureaucrats in Washington playing with the livelihoods of Americans as if they're nothing more than just pieces on a chessboard. Now, the media may continue to chase whatever issue the President and his campaign decides to fabricate from day to day, but these are the facts behind this President's devastating economic policies. And that's why it's a story the President would rather the media ignored. Well, Republicans aren't going to ignore it. We're going to keep talking about the President's policies. And so I commend Senator Inhofe for keeping us focused on this particular policy that's devastating to so many Americans. Madam President, I yield the floor.
This order, the time until 11:30 a.m. will be equally divided and controlled by the two leaders or their designees, with the Republicans controlling the first 15 minutes and the majority controlling the second 15 minutes.
Madam President, in our first
Senator
order,
from Oklahoma.
we're going to yield to the Senator from Alaska, Senator Murkowski, for 10 minutes, and then to Senator Manchin for 5 minutes. In the second round, we're going to be having Senators Barrasso, Bozeman, Risch, Manchin, Blunt, Kyle, and Toomey. Thank you. Next, please.
Madam President.
Senator from Alaska.
Madam President, I think that most Americans would agree that it's important that we strike a proper balance between abundant and affordable energy and responsible standards of environmental performance. But too often in recent years, the energy-environmental balance has been lost. Restoring a sense of equilibrium is important for both the health of the American people and our nation's economy. And although we see the need for this balance just every day in Alaska, restoring it has become what I think is a national challenge, and that's why I support Senator Inhofe's resolution to disapprove the mercury and air toxic standards, or the MATS rule. Congress has tasked the EPA with implementing laws to protect public health. That statutory obligation absolutely requires respect. But although the executive branch gets to make reasonable policy calls in performing that duty, its regulatory authority is strictly bounded by law. Today's EPA too often seems to impose requirements that go beyond what is authorized or needed. And this overreaching stifles the energy and natural resource production the nation needs to restore prosperity and technological leadership. And here's the sad thing. The resulting rules do not credibly improve public health. EPA is now proceeding with an unprecedented litany of new rules whose benefits are murky at best, but whose costs are very, very real and detrimental to human welfare. The nation can and must strike a better balance. Even in today's divided times, a broad consensus remains. Achieving affordable and abundant energy coupled with strong environmental standards, I think, is the right combination. Most would also agree that energy and environment-related public policy decisions should be based on the facts and informed by rigorous scientific discourse. Now, applying this consensus shows that really the devil is in the details here. So let's look closely at the MATS rule. If this rule is allowed to stand, it will put electric reliability at unacceptable risk and raise electricity costs with very little, if any, appreciable benefit to human health. The North American Electric Reliability Corporation, or NERC, which is the independent federally certified electric reliability organization, recently reported that environmental regulations are shown to be the #1 risk to reliability over the next 5 years. That's the statement from NERC. The members of the relatively small and apolitical groups of engineers who keep the lights on and administer electricity markets, they tell me that they are worried today not only about the reliability of electric service, but about its affordability. And I'd like to speak to the affordability side in just a minute here. Reasonable regulation, clearly appropriate. And EPA has the discretion, indeed the obligation, I think, to adopt balanced rules. But unfortunately, EPA's approach has been aimed more at its statutory obligations. Through MATS and through other rules, EPA wants to influence how investments in energy production are made, and so it's imposed a series of very stringent obligations that perhaps are not even achievable. For example, the Institute of Clean Air Companies, which is an association representing emissions control technology vendors, these are the guys who sell all this stuff, has asked EPA to reconsider MATS, and they've said that our member companies cannot ensure that the new final source mercury standard can be achieved in practice. These are those that would make a profit off of selling these, and they're saying they don't think that it can be achieved. Even though I believe the United Mine Workers of America, who say that their comments and like-minded ones to EPA on the proposed MATS rule were ignored, it doesn't have to be this way. EPA received thousands of pages of very detailed, very thoughtful proposals for improving MATS. About 150 electric generators filed their comments. Edison Electric Institute, as just one example, filed more than 75 pages of very precise observations for improvements in MATS, and they suggested many very, very specific changes. The states were active too. 27 states seeking significant changes in the proposal. There were almost 20 petitions for reconsideration pending at EPA, and they're pending now. 30 petitions have been filed for judicial review. 24 states, Madam President, have asked the courts to force EPA to do better with MATS. Now, I always say that we need to give credit where credit is due. On the treatment of condensable particulate matter, not many of us are focused on condensable particulate matter, but EPA has made some good changes with regards to that between the proposed and the final MATS rule. This reduced dramatically the need for construction of expensive pollution control devices known as bag houses. By By itself, this one change to the proposed rule reduced the overall cost of compliance by billions of dollars, and it relieves somewhat the challenges of maintaining electric reliability while achieving compliance with the rule. Adopting a more reasonable approach in this one area did not sacrifice any appreciable benefit. So more must be done. Congress must tell EPA to revisit other suggestions for similar improvements. And why the need to keep forcing the improvements? Well, the vast majority of the benefits that the EPA claims from MATS are the results of its counting coincidental reductions of particulate matter below standards that EPA has determined are sufficient to protect public health. Emissions of mercury by American power plants have declined over the past 20 years without the MATS rule. EPA itself estimates the annual benefits of mercury reductions attributable to the rule at only $500,000 to $6 million, but annual costs at about $10 billion. Now, finally, Madam President, EPA's actions are driving up the cost of electricity, too. PJM, which is the independent regional transmission organization that's responsible for coordinating the movement of wholesale electricity in all or part of 13 states, as well as here in the nation's capital. They reported two-year capacity price increases of 390%, most of which it attributed to the cost of environmental compliance, with a nearly 1,200% spike in northern Ohio. PJM also plans for about $2 billion in additional transmission investment to maintain reliability in the face of EPA rules. Clearly, these are significant costs that will be passed on to our consumers. Madam President, I think MATS is a major rule that needs a major reset by Congress. EPA could then devise a new rule that's truly aimed at protecting public health and carrying out the law rather than trying to push a particular fuel, coal, out of the market. With that, Madam President, I thank the senator from Oklahoma for his leadership on this issue, and I yield the floor.
Madam President,
From Oklahoma.
I thank the senator from Alaska for very kind remarks, and we recognize now for 5 minutes the senator from Texas, Senator Cornyn.
Madam President.
Texas.
Madam President, I come to the floor to join my colleague from Alaska and from Oklahoma and others to express my disapproval, and I intend to vote in favor of the resolution of disapproval of the Environmental Protection Agency's mercury and air toxic standards rule known as Utility MAC. Now, of course, the debate sometimes when you talk about pollution, when you talk about the byproducts of coal-fired power plants are cast in apocalyptic terms that have no real bearing on reality or in terms of the science and in terms of the economic impact of the rule or the health benefits supposedly to be derived. And I want to talk about that just briefly. While this rule claims to be about public safety, it is a job-killing, ideologically driven attempt to cripple the coal industry in the United States, an industry that employs an awful lot of people, feeds a lot of families, and this administration, unfortunately, is using the EPA to destroy a major source of reliable, affordable, baseload electricity that we sorely need. You know, the President talks about being for an all-of-the-above energy policy, but yet his administration, through this regulation that we seek to disapprove today, is going to effectively take one of those most abundant, low-cost sources of energy off the table for the American people. Of course, Congress would never pass such a law in our own right, so the administration is using a ruling from an unelected group of bureaucrats who aren't subject to political accountability. This is another example of executive overreach, and it's bad news for consumers and job creators alike. Power companies have confirmed that utility MAC standards for new power sources are so stringent that no new coal-fired power plant will be built in the United States. No new coal-fired power plant will be built in the United States, no matter how modern and how clean the technology will allow that power plant to operate. And so the consequence will be that Utility MAC will damage grid reliability, it will destroy jobs, and it will raise electricity prices. Not a small matter when many of our seniors are on fixed incomes and are going to suffer as a result of this rule that really does not do what its advocates tout it for. The costs of utility MAC will exceed the benefits by roughly 1,600 to 1. Now, some claim that that doesn't really matter, that benefits are benefits no matter what the cost, no matter how many jobs it kills, no matter how much it raises the price of electricity on seniors in my state who are living in very hot summers. If we have another year like we had last year, and I hope we don't, where we had 100-degree temperatures more than 70 days, and I think it was even more than that, which threatened the capacity of the power grid to even produce the electricity so people could run their air conditioners, that the detriment to our seniors in terms of public health and in terms of cost being on fixed income are quite evident. According to the EPA, more than 99% of the health benefits from utility MAC will not even come from mercury reductions, but rather from reductions in particulate matter that are already regulated as safe levels under the Clean Air Act. So either the EPA will be double counting existing benefits or else it will be setting new levels for other byproducts that are not justified by public health concerns. In short, the benefits of this regulation are dubious, but the costs are real, and they're already harming the United States economy with existing power plants being shut down and others being scrapped. The United States currently has more than 1,400 coal-fired electricity generating units operating more than 600 plants. Together, these power plants generate almost half of the electricity produced in our country. Again, we're not talking about taking wind energy off the table. We're not talking about other ways to generate electricity, but this is one of the cheapest, most abundant sources of energy in our country, and we're simply killing it. So sponsors of utility MAC repeatedly tout its health benefits, but those are overstated. However, they understate the impact this will have on jobs. It will kill jobs. People will lose their jobs in a tough economy. And so I would urge my colleagues to pull back the curtain on the EPA and see utility MAC for what it is, an economic disaster shrouded in false claims about public health. Americans deserve smart regulation and based on logic and sound science. Utility MAC is the exact opposite and deserves to be rejected. Madam President, I yield the floor.
Madam President.
Senator from West Virginia.
Madam President, in the shadow of one seemingly narrow Senate vote, that being the Inhofe resolution of disapproval of the Environmental Protection Agency's rule on mercury and air toxics, I rise to talk about West Virginia, about our people, our way of life, our health, our state's economic opportunity, and about our future. Coal has played an enormous part in our past and can play an enormous part in our future, but will only happen if we face reality. This is critical and a very contentious time in the Mountain State. The dialogue on coal, its impacts, and federal government's role has reached a stunningly fevered pitch. Carefully orchestrated messages that strike fear into the hearts of West Virginians and feed uncertainty about coal's future are the subject of millions of dollars of paid television ads, billboards, break room bulletin boards, public meetings, letters, and lobbying campaigns. A daily onslaught declares that coal is under siege from harmful outside sources and that the future of the state is bleak unless we somehow turn back the clock, ignore the present, and block the future. West Virginians understandably worry that a way of life and the dignity of the job is at stake. Change and uncertainty in the coal industry is unsettling and nothing new, but it is unsettling. But my fear is that concerns are also being fueled by the narrow view of others with divergent views and motivations, one that denies the inevitability of change in the energy industry and unfairly, and I feel this strongly, leaves coal miners in the dust. The reality is that those who run the coal industry today would rather attack false enemies and deny real problems than solve problems that would help them and the people they employ and the states they work in. Instead of facing the challenges and making tough decisions, like men of a different era, that back in the 70s I remember a fellow named from Consolidation Coal named Bobby Brown, and he just got together with United Mine Workers on his own. We were having a lot of temporary restraining orders and strikes at that time, and they sat down, and because he was not a timid man, Bobby Brown, he was a head of a company, but he was a very forceful leader. They worked out something which gave us peace in the coal fields of West Virginia, which is something, for a long time. It was a courageous act by a courageous, non-timid man. Scare tactics are a cynical waste of time and money, and worst of all, coal miners' hopes, because coal miners buy in to all the television that they hear, are controlled by it, have large salaries, so that in a sense they're stuck where they are, happily funded, but without a place to look forward to. But sadly, these days, coal operators have closed themselves off from any other opposing voices, and almost none have the courage to speak out for the change, any kind of change, even though it's been staring them in the face for decades. They've known about it. They've ignored it. This reminds me of the auto industry, which also resisted change for decades. Coal operators should learn from the mistakes and the recent success of the automobile industry. I passionately believe that coal miners deserve better than they're getting from coal operators, and West Virginians deserve better also. So let's start with the truth. Coal today faces real challenges, even threats, and we all know what they are. First, our coal reserves are finite, and many coal-fired plants are aging. The cheap, easy coal seams are diminishing rapidly, and production is falling, especially in the central Appalachian Basin in southern West Virginia. Production is shifting to lower-cost areas like Illinois and the Powder River Basin in the Wyoming areas. The average age of our nation's 1,100-plus coal-fired plants is 42.5 years old, with hundreds of plants even older. These plants run less often, are less economic, and obviously less efficient. Second, natural gas use is on the rise. Power companies are switching to natural gas because of lower prices, cheaper construction costs, lower emissions, and vast, steady supplies. Even traditional coal companies like Consolidation, Consol, are increasingly investing in natural gas as opposed to coal. Third, the shift to a lower carbon economy is not going away. And it's a disservice, a terrible disservice to coal miners and their families to pretend that it is, to tell them that it is, that everything can be as it was. It can't be. That's over. Coal companies deny that we need to do anything to address climate change, despite the established scientific consensus and mounting national desire, including in West Virginia, for a cleaner, healthier environment. Despite the barrage of ads, the EPA alone is not going to make or break coal. Coal operators would love to think that that's the case because it's a great target, and it's much easier to criticize than to do something. There are many forces exerting pressure, and that agency is just one of them. 2 years ago, Madam President, I offered a timeout on EPA carbon rules. a 2-year suspension that could have broken the logjam in Congress and given us the opportunity to address carbon issues aggressively and legislatively. But instead of supporting this approach, coal operators went for broke. They saw a fatter opportunity when they demanded a complete repeal of all EPA authority to address carbon emissions forever. They demanded all or nothing. They turned aside a compromise, and in the end, they got nothing. Well, last year they ran exactly the same play, demanding all or nothing on the cross-state air pollution rule, refusing to entertain any middle ground and denying even a hint of legitimacy for the views of the other side, and they lost again, badly. So here we are with another all-or-nothing resolution which is absolutely destined to fail. And we are arguing, and months and weeks, years go by. This foolish action wastes time and money that could have been invested in the future of coal. Instead, with each bad vote that they get, the coal operators, they give away more of their leverage and they lock in their failure. This time, the issue is whether to block an EPA rule, as has been said here, the mercury and air toxic standards that require coal-fired plants to reduce mercury and other toxic air pollution. I oppose this resolution because I care so much about West Virginia. Without good health, demeaned here in this debate so far, it's difficult to hold down a job or live the American dream. Chronic illness is debilitating. I've made a career in the Senate of health care, and it impacts families' income, their prosperity, and ultimately families' happiness. The annual health benefits of the rule are enormous. EPA has relied on thousands of studies, thousands of studies that established the serious and long-term impact of these pollutants on premature deaths, heart attacks, hospitalizations, pregnant women, babies, and children. Do West Virginians care about these kinds of things? I think they do. Moreover, it significantly reduces the largest remaining human-caused emission of mercury, which is a potent neurotoxin with fetal impacts. Maybe some can shrug off the advice of the American Academy of Pediatrics and many, many other professional medical and scientific groups, but I do not. I do not. The rule has been in the works, Madam President, through a public process for many years. Some businesses, including some utilities in West Virginia, have already invested in technology and are ready to comply. Others have not prepared because they have chosen to focus on profits rather than upgrading or investing in these smaller, older, and less efficient coal-fired plants that were paid for decades ago and that they'll tell you would be retired anyway. That's right. Every single plant slated for closure in West Virginia was already on the chopping block from their own corporate board's decision. It's important, I think, to be truthful with miners. It's sort of a forgotten art and a travesty. You have to be truthful to miners that coal plants will close because of decisions made by corporate boards long ago, not just because of EPA regulations, but because the plants are no longer economical as utilities build low-emission natural gas plants. Natural gas has its challenges, too, with questions about water contamination and shortages and other environmental concerns. But while coal executives pine for the past, the natural gas folks look to the future, investing in technologies to reduce their environmental footprint, and they're working with others on ways to support the safe development of gas. And we're all going to be watching that very closely, are we not? It's not too late, you know, for the coal industry to step up and leadership by embracing the realities of today and creating a sustainable future. It's not been too late for a long time. Discard the scare tactics. Stop denying science. Listen to what markets are saying about greenhouse gases and other environmental concerns, to what West Virginians are saying about their water and their air and their health and the cost of caring for seniors and for children who are the most susceptible to pollution. Stop and listen to West Virginians, miners' families included, who see the bitterness of the fight we're having now and has been going on forever, that the bitterness of the fight has taken on more importance than any potential solutions. The point is to put up block after block, which loses time after time, but at least you're fighting and you have something you can scream about, but you're making no progress at all. Those same miners that I talk about care deeply about their children's health. They care about them. They're family people. I know them. I went there in 1964, lived among miners for 2 years, and have known them ever since closely, intimately. They care about these things. They care about the same things that other West Virginians do and other people all over the country. And they care about the streams and the mountains of West Virginia. And they know down deep that we can't keep to the same path. They're not allowed to say so, but they know that. Miners, their families, and their neighbors are why, Madam President, I came to West Virginia, why I went to West Virginia. And they're why I made our state my home. I've been proud to stand shoulder to shoulder with coal miners, and we've done a lot of good things together over the years. For more than 36 years, Madam President, I've worked to protect the health and safety of coal miners, everything from the historic Coal Act back in 1992 to mine safety laws, pension, black lung benefits, always with miners' best interests in mind. And despite what critics contend, I am standing with coal miners today by voting against this resolution. I don't support this resolution of disapproval because it does nothing to look to the future of coal. It moves us backward, not forward, and unless this industry aggressively leans into the future, coal miners will be the big losers. Beyond the frenzy over this one EPA rule, we need to focus squarely on the real task of finding a long-term future for something called clean coal. That is possible. We have demonstrated that. That's being done in various places in the country right now. And this coal has to address legitimate environmental and health concerns. Of course it should. Global warming and all of that counts. Now let me be clear. Yes, I am frustrated with much of the top levels of the coal industry, at least in my state of West Virginia, but most of the corporate headquarters are elsewhere. But I'm not giving up for a strong, clean coal future. I am not giving up. To get there, we'll need a bold partner, innovation, and major public and private investments. In the meantime, we should not forget that coal-fired plants provide good jobs for thousands of West Virginians. It remains the underpinning of many of our small communities, and I will always be focused foremost on their future. So in concluding, instead of finger-pointing, we should commit ourselves to a smart action plan that will help with job transition opportunities, sparking new manufacturing and exploring the next generation of technology. In other words, not just depend upon coal, but depend on a lot of things. None of this is impossible. Solving big challenges is what we do in West Virginia. I would much rather embrace the future boldly. I yield the floor.
Madam President.
Senator from California.
May I, before Senator Rockefeller leaves, I want to take 30 seconds to say something. And that is, I believe when the next historian writes a book about leadership, courage, and integrity in the United States Senate, that this speech today will be featured. in that book. And I'm so proud to know you, Senator. And I'm concluding that 30 seconds, and I would like to ask how much time remains between the two sides.
The majority controls 36 minutes, and the Republicans control 39 minutes.
Senator Yield.
Yes, the
It's our
time is yours.
understanding that we have approximately 42 minutes apiece, but the time would change as the speakers do that, and we'll go back and forth.
Well, Senator, they just said it's 39 for you and 36 for me.
I like that.
So go right ahead.
The senator from South Dakota for how much time do you decide on that? 7 minutes. Yeah. 7 minutes.
Thank you.
Senator from South Dakota.
Madam President, I thank the senator from Oklahoma for his leadership on this issue, for yielding the time, and appreciate everything that he has done to bring Senate Joint Resolution 37 to the floor of the United States Senate. Madam President, as the father of two daughters, I want a cleaner, safer, and healthier environment for their generation and for future generations. And thanks to the common sense policies that balance economic growth with a cleaner environment, our country has made significant progress toward improving the quality of our air and our water. We've made progress under Republican presidents, and we've made progress under Democrat presidents. We've made progress during Democrat control of the Senate and Republican control of the Senate. But, Madam President, what the Obama administration is doing with this regulation and with many of the other their policies that pertain to energy is pursuing an ideologically driven agenda in which the costs far outweigh the benefits. He promised that his energy plan would necessarily make electricity costs skyrocket, and his policies are clearly delivering on that promise. A prime example of that flawed agenda is Utility MACT, which is the most expensive regulation in EPA's history with an estimated cost of $10 billion. These are costs that will be passed on to families and small businesses across the country at a time when we're experiencing the worst economic recovery in over 60 years. Madam President, we all know the statistics. Unemployment's been at 8% now for 40 consecutive months. Real unemployment is above 14%. There are 23 million Americans who are not working today. Madam President, 5.4 million Americans have remained out of work for over a year. And despite these facts, President Obama continues to push regulations like Utility MACT that are going to make energy more expensive and at the same time destroy good-paying jobs. According to the National Economic Research Associates, Utility MACT will cost between 180,000 and 215,000 jobs by the year 2015. When including President Obama's other regulations on the electric power sector, the United States stands to lose approximately 1.65 million jobs by the year 2020. Madam President, we simply cannot afford these politically driven regulations at a time when 23 million Americans remain unemployed or underemployed. Madam President, low-income and middle-class families are the ones who are going to get hit hardest by the administration's actions. Families that earn less than $50,000 already spend 21% of their income on energy costs compared to 9% for those making more than $50,000. Now, thanks to the EPA's regulatory actions, those costs are going to go up an average of 6.5% and as much as 19% in some areas. Middle-class incomes have already fallen by over $4,300 these past 3 years, and now President Obama wants to further burden them with higher energy costs. These higher energy costs are not some far-off projection. In many cases, these costs are already being realized. And as an example, PJM, which is a regional transmission organization that coordinates the movement of wholesale electricity in 13 states in the District of Columbia. In their May 2012 capacity auction, PJM reported two-year capacity price increases of 390%. PJM is reporting a nearly tenfold increase in wholesale energy costs in northern Ohio. According to one of their spokespersons, capacity prices were higher than last year's because of retirements of existing coal-fired generation, resulting largely from environmental regulations which go into effect in the year 2015. The result could cause electricity bills across the PJM region to increase by up to $130 and potentially much higher in places like northern Ohio. In addition to electricity rates, EPA's agenda will drive up the cost of food, transportation, fuels, and manufactured goods as those costs get passed on across all the sectors of the economy. The end result Madam President, is more pain for the middle class, slower economic growth, and fewer jobs. Now, Madam President, the President of the United States, President Obama, likes to talk a lot about fairness. And I would ask my colleagues, is it fair that unaccountable EPA bureaucrats are going to drive up utility bills by up to 19%? Is it fair that manufacturers are going to have to pay higher energy bills rather than hire new workers? Is it fair that small towns across the Midwest are already being devastated by coal plant closings on account of regulations from the Obama administration? And is it fair that thousands of workers are going to be laid off and are going to lose not only their paychecks but their employer-provided health care coverage as well? For most South Dakotans and millions of hardworking taxpayers across the country, I believe the answer is that the consequences of these regulations are inherently unfair. They penalize hardworking middle-class Americans. In the case of Utility MAC, consumers are going to pay a heavy price for President Obama's political agenda to restrict access to the abundant and affordable sources of domestic energy that we possess in this country. Madam President, most Americans believe regulations should work for consumers and not against consumers. Unfortunately, EPA bureaucrats have drafted the Utility MAC regulation in an inefficient and unworkable manner. Utility MAC's new source standards are so strict they cannot possibly be met. According to the Institute of Clean Air Companies, the pro-environmental trade association comprising nearly 100 suppliers of air pollution equipment, Utility MAC makes it, and I quote, nearly impossible to construct a new coal-fired units because financing of such units requires guarantees from equipment suppliers that all emissions limits can be met, end quote. Madam President, there has got to be a better approach. Senate Joint Resolution 37, which would force a rewrite of Utility MAC, is the only solution to address the rule's problems. It is time to rewrite Utility MAC in a manner that better balances economic growth with environmental protection. And I would hope today, Madam President, that we will have a majority of our colleagues here in the United States Senate that will support S.J. Res. 37. Doing so will send a strong message to the Obama administration that the United States Senate will not stand by and watch his regulatory agenda further hurt small businesses and middle-class families, making it more expensive and more difficult for businesses in this country to create jobs. That is the end result of this regulation. It is the end result of many of the energy policies and regulations that are coming out of this administration. And, Madam President, that has to stop. We have got to get Americans back to work. We've got to get our economy growing again. Madam President, I yield the floor.
Senator from California.
I yield 5 minutes to the senator from Tennessee.
Madam President.
Senator from Tennessee.
I thank the senator from California and the senator from Maryland especially for his courtesy. Madam President, I would agree that the EPA has become a happy hunting ground for goofy regulations. But the late William F. Buckley once said that even a stopped clock is right twice a day. And on this rule, this clean air rule, and the earlier interstate rule, I believe EPA is right. The effect of upholding this rule will be finally to require that most coal plants everywhere in America will have to install two kinds of pollution control equipment, scrubbers and SCRs. And this will basically finish the job of capturing sulfur and nitrogen oxides, fine particles, and the 187 toxic pollutants that were specifically identified by Congress in the 1990 Clean Air Amendments. The Tennessee Valley Authority has already committed to install this equipment by 2018, but TVA alone can't clean up Tennessee's air because dirty air blows in from other states. So let me say what upholding this rule will do for the people of Tennessee. First, it'll hasten the day when Memphis, Chattanooga, and Knoxville are not three of the top 5 worst asthma cities, which they are today, and Nashville's not competing to be in the top 10. I'd like to include in the record an article by Dr. William Lawson of Vanderbilt University, which appeared in the Tennessean this week, who treats patients with respiratory diseases in Nashville. He says, pollution from these power plants means my patients suffer more. Pollution increases their chances of being hospitalized. Some of these toxic emissions even cause cancer and can interfere with our children's neurological development. Number 2, This rule means that visitors will soon not even think of calling the Great Smoky Mountains the Great Smoggy Mountains because it's one of the most polluted national parks in America. We want those 9 million visitors to keep coming every year with their dollars and their jobs. Instead of seeing 24 miles on a bad air day from Clingman's Dome, our highest peak, this rule should mean that we'll gradually move towards seeing 100 miles from Clingman's Dome as the air cleans up and we look through the natural blue haze. Third, this rule should mean fewer health advisory warnings in our streams that say don't eat the fish because of mercury contamination. Half of the man-made mercury in the United States comes from coal plants, and as much as 70% of the mercury pollution in our local environment, like streams and rivers, can come from nearby coal plants. Fourth, we have seen that Nissan, had it been unable to get an air quality permit in Nashville in 1980, would have gone to Georgia. And if Senator Corker had not, as mayor of Chattanooga, improved the air quality in that city in the mid-2000s, the Volkswagen site there would be a vacant lot today. We know that every Tennessee metropolitan area is struggling to stay within legal clean air standards, and we don't want the Memphis megasite to stay a vacant lot because dirty air blowing in from Mississippi and Arkansas makes the Memphis air too dirty for a new industry to locate there. We know that these rules will add a few dollars to our electric bills, but in our case, most of that's going to happen anyway because the Tennessee Valley Authority has already agreed to put this pollution control equipment on its coal-fired power plants. We know we can reduce the effect of these expenses on monthly electric bills because states may give utilities 4 years to comply with the rule, and the President may, under the law, give them a 5th and 6th year. Senator Pryor and I intend to ask the President to give that 5th and 6th year to reduce costs on electric bills. We know that long-term, this rule will secure a place in America's clean energy future for clean coal. For example, the largest public utility, TVA, the largest private utility, Southern Company, both putting on pollution control equipment on their coal plants, plan to make at least 1/3 of their electricity from coal long-term. Madam President, in 1990, 22 years ago, Congress told the EPA to do this, to make this rule, when it passed the Clean Air Act amendments. In 2008, the court told the EPA to make this rule. Over the years, I have learned that cleaner air not only means better health, but also means better jobs for Tennesseans. And I'm proud to stand up on behalf of the people of Tennessee to uphold this clean air rule. I thank the President. I yield the floor.
Madam President.
Senator from Oklahoma.
I ask that we recognize the Senator from Wyoming, Senator Brasso, for 9 minutes.
Madam President.
Senator from Wyoming.
Madam President, I asked you please give me a warning when I have 1 minute remaining. Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, today I rise in support of the Inhofe Utility MAC amendment. This amendment protects communities and jobs in the West, in the Midwest, and in Appalachia, and specifically jobs that depend on coal. These communities depend on coal to heat and cool their homes at an affordable price, to power the factories where they work, to generate revenue that creates additional jobs. We're talking about affordable domestic coal that also pays for the mortgages on their homes, the clothes and food for their children, and the medical care for their grandparents. I will tell you, if the utility MAC rule is allowed to proceed, it would mandate that virtually no new coal-fired power plants could be built anymore in the United States. Many still in existence would have to shut down. It is painful to think about all of these folks who will be out of work, their bills mounting, their families losing their homes, their future looking bleak. Now, the amazing thing is that the EPA does not dispute these outcomes, does not dispute what I'm saying. They know exactly what they are doing. Their ideology is more important to them than the living and breathing people of our coal communities. Just ask the EPA Region 1 Administrator, Curtis Spaulding, who was visiting with a group of students in Connecticut. What he went on to talk about was the fact, he said, basically, gas plants are the performance standard, which means that if you want to build a coal plant, he said, you have a big problem. He said this was a huge decision, and he's talking about these regulations that have come out of Lisa Jackson, the head of the EPA. He went on to tell this group of students, he said, you got to remember, he said, if you go to West Virginia, Pennsylvania, and all those places, you have coal communities who depend on coal. He said, and to say that we just think those communities should just go away. That's what he said, should just go away. He said, we can't do that, but she had to do what the law and policy suggested. He said it was painful. He said it was painful every step of the way, but they did it anyway. President Obama's heavy-handed EPA admits that these communities in West Virginia, Pennsylvania, many other states in the West, Midwest, and Appalachia, he said, will just go away. Chilling words, because the EPA is supposed to be about protecting people, protecting their communities, protecting their environment, and protecting their health. With the Utility MAC rule, the EPA is doing just the opposite. They're making communities go away. They are hurting communities, communities of families, children, seniors, gone as a result of these regulations. How could one justify these actions? Well, we are told that there are enormous health benefits. That's what they say, enormous health benefits, they claim, to the public by the issuance of this rule. First of all, how do you protect something if the community is gone? So obviously, these folks in West Virginia, Pennsylvania are not the beneficiaries of EPA protection. Second, the medical benefits of the rule come from reductions in particulate matter in areas of the country that are currently well within healthy thresholds set by the EPA. I will tell you the EPA is cooking the books. Now, this rule does very little to protect the public health. In fact, it creates a health crisis in this country because of the additional unemployment, that this rule is going to cause in the West, the Midwest, and in Appalachia. To highlight the point, on Monday of this week, the number of us in the Senate who are physicians, who are doctors, sent a letter to President Obama. This letter, and I ask that this be included in the congressional record. Thank you, Madam President. In this letter, we expressed our concerns about the impending health crisis that the unemployment caused by the EPA's policies is having on families, on children, on pregnant mothers, and on the elderly. The letter reads in part, we are writing to express our concern that the barrage of regulations coming out of the Environmental Protection Agency, barrage of regulations designed to end coal in America and in American electricity generation will have a devastating effect on the health of the American families. Just before you made the decision, Mr. President, to withdraw the EPA's plan to revise its ozone standard, a plan which would have destroyed hundreds of thousands of jobs, your former White House Chief of Staff, Bill Daley, asked the question, what are the health impacts of unemployment? So today we are requesting that you consider your former aide's question carefully. Instead of putting forth rules that create great economic pain, which will have a terrible effect on public health, we hope that go forward you will work with Republicans to craft policies that actually achieve both environmental protection and economic growth. And that's the key, and economic growth, not economic destruction. As you know, proponents of your EPA's aggressive agenda, the letter goes on, claim that regulations that kill jobs and cause electricity rates to skyrocket will somehow be good for the American people. We come to this issue as medical doctors and would like to offer our second opinion. The EPA's regulatory regime will devastate communities that rely on affordable energy, on children whose parents will lose their jobs, and the poor and elderly on fixed incomes that do not have the funds to pay for higher energy costs. The result for public health will be disastrous in ways not seen since the Great Depression. Later on, we talk about, in the letter, we talk about the latest research on the health impacts of unemployment. There's a doctor from Johns Hopkins who testified just last year before the Senate Environment and Public Health Committee, explaining that unemployment is a risk factor for elevated illness and mortality rates. In addition, the National Center for Health Statistics has found that children in poor families are 4 times as likely to be in bad health as other families. Economists have also studied this issue. The New York Times, May 13th of this year, the human disaster of unemployment. The human disaster of unemployment, and that's what this EPA regulation is going to do today, cause additional human disaster for people out of work. We included for the President a copy of a report that I've written called Red Tape Making Americans Sick, a new report on the health impacts of high unemployment. Studies show EPA rules cost Americans their jobs and their health. This report contains the latest research from medical professionals from Johns Hopkins, from Yale, and others that show that unemployment causes serious health impacts. Madam President, unemployment has been rampant in this country under this administration, and it's been due in many ways to the mountains of job-crushing red tape from the EPA and other agencies. The EPA's Utility MAC rule will only make things worse for hard-hit areas in the West, the Midwest, and Appalachia. You know, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, since 2008, Montana's lost 3,200 manufacturing jobs, Missouri 41,000, Ohio 100,000, Michigan 67,000 jobs lost, Pennsylvania 80,000, West Virginia 7,000. Each one of these people who lost their job will be subjected to a greater risk of cancer, heart attack, stroke, depression, higher incidence that we know of spousal abuse, substance abuse in these families. As demonstrated by the latest research, their children will suffer too as medical costs pile up, as electricity bills to heat and cool their homes skyrocket, and the cost of everyday living continues to go up. The Utility MAC will only expose thousands more to these risks. The EPA should immediately stop pushing expensive regulations that put Americans out of work and into their doctor's office. Instead of exacerbating unemployment and harming public health, this administration and this EPA needs to work with Republicans. Work together in our efforts to implement policies that achieve true health benefits without destroying jobs, and indeed American affordable energy in the process. We need to keep American energy and make American energy as clean as we can, as fair as we can, while still keeping good-paying jobs and keeping energy prices affordable. This is a recipe for a healthier, economically stronger country. I urge a yes vote for the Inhofe Utility MAC amendment. I thank the President and yield the floor. Thank you.
Madam President, I would yield myself 1 minute of my time to put into the record a couple of things. First, an editorial